Long before the invention of clocks and calendars as we know them, Rome measured time through a mixture of superstition and raw political power. Priests twisted the months to favor generals they supported. Senators bought extra days of glory for themselves. Time itself had become a commodity, something to be traded and manipulated by those who held authority. The rhythm of existence was for sale to the highest bidder. And then came Julius Caesar. He was a soldier, a scholar, a visionary who looked up at the stars and saw a world fundamentally broken. He decided that he would fix it. What he would eventually build was far more than a simple calendar. It was a machine of empire, a spell cast against decay itself, a bold declaration that even the heavens could be ruled by human reason and will. But when you bend the cosmos to your will, the cosmos always finds a way to bend back. This is the story of the man who conquered time, and the moment when time finally conquered him. Ancient Rome lived in temporal disorder. The calendar that governed daily life was not a tool of measurement, but an instrument of manipulation. The pontifices, the priests who controlled the sacred calendar, held enormous power. They could add months when they pleased. They could erase days that had already been lived. They stretched time for their allies and compressed it for their enemies. Farmers planted their crops by guesswork, never truly certain when the seasons would turn. Soldiers marched to war without knowing if the campaign season had truly begun. Merchants signed contracts that meant different things depending on which priest you asked. The empire that had conquered half the known world could not measure its own days with any consistency or accuracy. Time was chaos, and chaos was immensely profitable for those who understood how to exploit it. The powerful grew richer through temporal manipulation, while common people struggled to align their lives with a calendar that shifted like sand beneath their feet. Religious festivals drifted away from their proper seasons. The spring equinox no longer arrived in spring. Winter solstice ceremonies took place in autumn. The entire cosmic order had been thrown into disarray. Into this broken world stepped Julius Caesar, a man who had conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon, but who now faced a more fundamental challenge. He was not just a general but a mathematician, trained in astronomy, who had witnessed the absurdity of an empire that could not measure its own existence. He had studied, he had calculated, and he had seen with perfect clarity how deeply Rome had failed the most basic task of civilization. Caesar looked at the chaos and felt something between disgust and determination. He had brought order to barbarian lands through military conquest. Now he would bring order to something even more fundamental. He would wage war not against nations, but against entropy itself. He would conquer not just territory, but the very fabric of existence. He vowed to bring order not only to Rome, but to the universe itself, to align human affairs with the eternal motion of the heavens. The sun rose each day over a city that did not know what day it was. This, Caesar decided, would no longer stand. If Rome was to be eternal, it needed to measure eternity properly. Caesar's military campaigns had taken him to Egypt, where he encountered something that would transform his understanding of time itself. The Egyptian priests had mastered astronomical observation with a precision that put Rome to shame. They aligned their temples with the sun and stars. They tracked the flooding of the Nile with calendrical accuracy. They understood that time was not a political convenience, but a cosmic reality that could be measured, predicted, and harmonized with human life. In Alexandria, the great center of learning, Caesar met Sosigenes, a scholar whose knowledge of astronomy was unmatched in the ancient world. Together, they began to forge something revolutionary. They would merge Egyptian precision with Roman ambition. They would take the astronomical knowledge of the Nile and impose it upon the Tiber. They would create a system that would synchronize human civilization with the movements of celestial bodies. The work was painstaking. Sosigenes calculated the true length of the solar year with remarkable accuracy. Caesar provided the political will to implement something that would overturn centuries of tradition. They designed a calendar of 12 months, with lengths that alternated to create a total of 365 days. But they understood that the solar year was slightly longer, so they added a leap day every 4 years to keep the calendar aligned with the seasons. The Julian calendar was born from this collaboration between scholarship and power. It was a human-made order that matched the heavens themselves. For the first time in Roman history, the civil year would move in harmony with the solar year. The chaos would end. Time would become predictable, measurable, rational. Caesar presented his reform to Rome not as a bureaucratic adjustment, but as a divine act, nothing less than the restoration of time itself. He decreed that the year we now call 46 BCE would last for 445 days to reset the calendar to its proper alignment with the seasons. The Romans called it the year of confusion, but it was confusion with a purpose. It was the painful birth of a new cosmic order. When the Julian calendar took effect on the 1st of January in 45 BCE, something fundamental shifted in human consciousness. For the first time, humanity measured the world by logic rather than superstition. The priests lost their power to manipulate months. The calendar became fixed, predictable, universal. Farmers could plan, merchants could contract, soldiers could march. The rhythm of life became steady and knowable. But the man who orders the heavens must soon face the chaos of men. With his calendar in place, Caesar began to reshape Rome according to his vision of perfect order. Festivals were realigned to their proper seasons. Debts were recalculated according to the new system. Agricultural cycles were restored to their natural rhythm. The harvest came when it was supposed to come. Spring arrived in spring. The world made sense again in a way it had not for generations. The Republic felt eternal under this new temporal order. Statues were erected proclaiming Caesar as the savior of order itself, the father of time, the man who had brought cosmic harmony to human affairs. His name became synonymous with power not just over nations, but over existence itself. People spoke of him not merely as a conqueror, but as something approaching divine. And Caesar, intoxicated by his achievement, began to believe what they were saying. He had done what the gods themselves had failed to do. He had brought order to chaos. He had bent the heavens to his will. He began to carry himself not as a mortal who had accomplished something great, but as someone who had transcended the human condition entirely. Senators began to whisper in the shadows. They said he had dethroned the gods. They said he had placed himself above Jupiter. They said that no man should have such power, not even over something as abstract as a calendar. But they misunderstood the true danger. Time itself had become political again, but in a new and more absolute way. Caesar's control over the calendar granted him control over something even more fundamental than military power. It granted him control over reality itself, over the shared framework through which all Romans experienced existence. Meanwhile, cosmic irony was already at work. The Julian calendar, for all its brilliance, contained a tiny flaw. The leap year system overcorrected slightly. The solar year was not quite as long as Sosigenes had calculated. Over centuries, the calendar would drift again. The seeds of temporal chaos had been sown even in the heart of Caesar's perfect order, but these were problems for distant generations. In his moment of triumph, Caesar could not see them. His power grew beyond all bounds. He became dictator perpetua, dictator in perpetuity. He planned campaigns to the ends of the earth. He designed monuments that would last forever. He believed, perhaps, that he had stepped outside of time itself, that the man who had measured eternity had become eternal himself. The senators watched and resented and plotted. The Ides of March approached on the calendar, a date made possible by Caesar's own reform, a day that would exist only because he had willed it into being. The calendar he had created was counting down to his destruction. Time, which he thought he had conquered, was preparing its revenge. The Senate floor on the Ides of March, 44 BCE. The air was thick with conspiracy and destiny. Caesar entered the chamber, perhaps sensing danger, perhaps too proud to acknowledge it. The men who had once called him savior now saw him as tyrant. The reformer had become the thing he fought against. They surrounded him with knives. Brutus, whom he had loved, Cassius, whom he had trusted, dozens of others, each adding their blade to the collective act of violence. As the blood spilled onto the marble, time seemed to freeze. The man who had measured the sun, who had aligned the calendar with the cosmos, who had brought order to the chaos of existence, died beneath the hands of mortals who resented his reach toward the divine. He fell at the base of Pompey's statue, and in that moment the irony became complete. He had fixed the calendar, but he could not fix the chaos of men. He had conquered time, but he could not conquer mortality. He had sought to impose order on the universe, but the universe had reminded him that he was still made of flesh and blood and vulnerability. And yet, even in death, Caesar's victory was absolute. The Julian calendar survived him. It would govern Rome for centuries after the empire that created it had fallen to dust. It would spread across Europe, carried by conquest and conversion. It would persist for 1600 years until the Gregorian reform made tiny adjustments to correct the drift that Sosigenes had not foreseen. Rome fell, empires faded, languages died, civilizations rose and collapsed into memory, but Caesar's days continued to define human existence. Every leap year that passes is a faint echo of his rebellion against temporal chaos. Every February 29th is a reminder that once a man looked at the stars and decided that humanity could measure them. The sundial in the Forum continued to cast shadows long after Caesar's body had turned to dust. His calendar kept ticking through the ages, indifferent to the mortality of its creator. Time had taken its revenge by killing the man, but the man had won his own strange victory by becoming inseparable from time itself. We still live inside Caesar's design. Every date on every calendar, every clock that measures our days, every appointment we schedule, and every deadline we meet exists within a framework that he created. The months still bear the names he assigned or inherited. The leap years still follow his pattern with only minor corrections. The fundamental structure of how we measure existence is still, in essence, Julian. Caesar failed to become a god in the way he might have imagined. He was not deified in the manner of the divine emperors who would follow him. He died violently and prematurely, cut down by those he thought were loyal. But he became something perhaps stranger and more enduring than a god. He became a constant. He became embedded in the very fabric of how humanity experiences time. Time, once chaotic and manipulable, now moves to a rhythm he established. Farmers plant by his months. Merchants contract by his days. Civilizations rise and fall while counting years in a system he made universal. The modern world, with all its digital precision and atomic clocks, still organizes itself according to a calendar designed by a Roman general 2,000 years ago. He is gone, his body long since returned to dust, his empire collapsed into history, his language preserved only by scholars, but his calendar ticks in every heartbeat of civilization. It pulses through every culture that adopted the Western timekeeping system. It structures the consciousness of billions who have never heard his name. There is something profoundly moving about this strange immortality. Caesar sought to conquer time, and time killed him for his hubris. But in dying, he achieved a victory more complete than any military campaign could have won. He wrote himself into the structure of existence. He made himself inseparable from the way humanity measures its days. Perhaps we never truly conquer time. Perhaps we only learn to borrow it from those who dared to measure it first. Perhaps the greatest victories are not the ones we win in life, but the patterns we leave behind, the systems that endure after memory fades, the invisible structures that shape how future generations experience reality. 2,000 years later, we still wake, work, and dream in Caesar's time. We schedule our lives by his calendar. We mark our births and deaths within his framework. We count down to midnight on a clock that runs according to his design. The man died, but his seconds never did. The conqueror fell, but the conquest remained absolute. In the end, Caesar's calendar reform was not just about organizing days and months. It was about humanity's eternal struggle against impermanence, our desperate need to impose order on chaos, our refusal to accept that we cannot control the fundamental forces that govern our existence. Caesar waged this war more successfully than perhaps any human before or since. He lost the battle for his own life, but he won the war for his legacy. Time took its revenge, as time always does. But Caesar had the last word. Every time we glance at a calendar, every time we mark a date, every time we live another day in the orderly progression of time, we are living proof that he succeeded. The cosmos bent back, but it bent back around a framework he created. The man who tried to master time became time's most enduring student, teaching us still, across the centuries, that some victories transcend death itself.